All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for the National Interest digital edition via Zoom. For those of you who I have not met in the flesh, my name is Harry Kazianis, and I'm Senior Director of Korean Studies here at the Center for the National Interest. I also have the privilege of being the executive editor of our publishing arm, the National Interest. I'd like to welcome everybody to our online forum today. A little thing we're calling North Korean America 2021, What Comes Next? And I think we're sort of fortunate today for our timing, because with everything breaking when it comes to Bob Woodward's new book, it seems like every couple seconds on Twitter there's a new excerpt that's being leaked, or some new quotes that are coming out, or a new letter between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. So I think we have a lot of things that we can talk about today when it comes to the DPRK-US relationship, and sort of, where things might go in 2021, no matter who's president of the United States. I'm for sure honored to moderate such a distinguished group of experts from areas of actual policy making on North Korea, a former high-level official, member of the US military who commanded forces in the Indo-Pacific. We have a very highly regarded academic. We have a wonderful member of our think tank community here in DC. So we've got a diverse group of experts that are going to try to tackle this issue for us today. Now, as time is short, as it always is when it comes to these webinars, I'm just going to take maybe 2 minutes to set the scene a little bit here and to talk maybe where we are today, and then I will leave it to our keynote speaker and our panelists to sort of take it from there and sort of maybe do some future gazing and see where we could go. But I think in short, I think it's very simple. Washington and Pyongyang right now are at an impasse. For the Trump administration, its pursuit of denuclearization, if you want to use that for a benchmark of success, has failed. For the Kim regime, its own pursuit of sanctions relief, as he told his own people, they would not have to tighten their belts anymore. If that's your benchmark for success, or Kim's benchmark for success, he's failed. Now, to be honest, I don't use those as goals for the DPRK or the United States when it comes to maybe recalibrating their relationship or trying to improve relations. But those were the two things that I think both leaders were trying to pursue. But I think we've come a long way. And I think, when we look at, the dangerous days of 2017, Donald Trump screaming fire and fury, Kim Jong-un making his own nuclear threats, Donald Trump at the United Nations threatening to utterly destroy North Korea. If that's your benchmark, we have come a long way. That is a very low one, admittedly, but I think that is the case. We've had 3 different meetings. You could call the last one a summit or just a meeting, but there has been a measure of dialogue that hasn't ever happened when it comes to the United States and the DPRK. But I think for both sides, I think there is a little of upsetment and resentment as to how far the process has gone. So where do we go from here? What happens next? For the United States, does the United States end up just giving up on denuclearization? I consider it almost a type of atomic straitjacket that really mitigates a lot of the things that the United States could do when it comes to North Korea. Perhaps arms control, that might be something. For North Korea, do the combined pressures of sanctions, COVID-19, induced border closures because of COVID-19, the landfall of 3 different typhoons, all sorts of agricultural problems, food shortages, does this push Kim Jong-un to maybe testing a solid field ICBM or detonate a nuclear weapon again? So this is where we are right now. I think with a lot of questions, we're all searching for a lot of answers, and that leads to good analysis and maybe some good scholarship and great webinars like this. So here is sort of where we're going to go today. First, we are going to have a keynote address. After that, it's about a 15-minute keynote, and I'll introduce our keynote speaker in a second. We are going to have a panel discussion with 3 very smart and engaging panelists I think many of you know and respect. So with that, let's get started. So our keynote speaker today, I know many of you know personally, know very well. He doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to try and do this justice. He's a former congressman, former UN ambassador, former energy secretary, and former governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson. One of the reasons I wanted to have Bill Richardson here today is because I think it's important. If we're talking about North Korea, we need to talk to experts who have negotiated with the North Koreans, who have arguably deep connections with the North Koreans, that understand them. I think the only way to really broach the subject is through talking to people that have that actual expertise. And what Governor Richardson is going to do for us today is he's going to give us a vision of what his sort of ideal North Korea policy will be. And then after that, our panelists, who I'll introduce after Governor Richardson, we'll get into where things could go in 2021 if Donald Trump is reelected or if Joe Biden takes the Oval Office in January. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Governor Richardson. Thank you for doing this, sir.
All right, thank you, Harry. And you guys are all the experts. I've been working on Venezuela hostages, so I'm not up to speed totally like you guys are. Let me thank the Center for National Interest. You guys do great work. Your op-eds, your discussions on so many issues, your grassroots. Thank you for having me. I think I'm just going to give some advice to whoever wins. I'm going to divide my talk into several frameworks. One, I'm going to say some nice things about people, hoping they don't destroy their careers on both sides. Number two, then I'm going to talk about some issues that I think should be avoided in any future negotiation, some recommendations. Then I'm going to go into some soft power issues that I think can precede a negotiation. And then I'm going to discuss, and all of this in 15 minutes. Don't worry, Harry, I'll keep it under 15. Some advice on some of the nuclear and missile issues. All right, so the nice things I'm going to say. I've negotiated with the North Koreans. I think it's best that we negotiate with the foreign ministry. They're the most knowledgeable about the U.S. Mrs. Choi, the head of the vice foreign minister, Kim Gae-kwan, the nuclear negotiator, Ambassador Pak in New York, although he mainly is a liaison. I have high regard for them. We all know that right now there's a little bit of a possible power struggle between the military and security and intelligence forces versus the foreign ministry. I always hope the foreign ministry wins. At the same time, Stephen Biegun, I think he's a good negotiator. He's adept. The problem that Stephen has is his North Korea desk officer is President Trump. So that doesn't help him have as much flexibility as he wants. I think, Harry, as you said, right now, it's an impasse. The North Koreans have not responded to us in negotiating. We've tried to set some outreach. It hasn't worked. I think the North Koreans are waiting for the result of the election, but who knows what's going to happen after the Woodward revelations. They're either going to react or not react. They're totally unpredictable. They may react in a positive, negative way or not at all. I hope they don't react in a negative way. Okay, so this is what I suggest in terms of the new policy. One, no summits, no presidential summits at this point. We should not rush into another summit with Kim Jong-un. Instead, working level negotiations that can advance a framework agreement to be signed at a later summit should commence immediately. Although I will say the channel that set up this summit for the president, the first meeting was a good one. Whatever was done is good. And I gave credit to the president for boldly reaching out to Kim Jong-un, although there have been no results because there was little preparation. There was too much pageantry. But at the same time, I think there is a little more stability in the peninsula, but the North Koreans obviously have increased their nuclear and missile capacity in that period. So it's not good. Okay, so number two, what else should we do? What I would do, and I don't think Matt's going to agree with me or Daryl, but what I think we should do is we should bring back the six-party talks. We should bring back Russia. We should bring, China. We should bring the six-party talks that were part of the negotiation in the Bush administration. I think not in replacement of bilateral talks, but as a supplement to bilateral talks. Number three, we need to negotiate directly with the North Koreans. They always would say to me, look, we're the big powers in the region. We don't want to go through South Korea. We don't want to go through Japan. Deal with us directly. And I don't think necessarily we've done that. We always seem to want the go-betweens, South Korea or China, help us set up meetings. Now, in a case where we don't have that contact and they don't want to meet with us, you got to try something differently. So I would, as much as we can, or deal directly with the North Koreans. I mentioned to Jessica, I would hold off on the track 2 talks. They get confusing. Let the two governments after the election start dealing directly instead of, I know these track 2 meetings sometimes yield good results, but I think we should try to get the government talks. I would also find a way, and this is something that you have experts, Harry, in the center. We got to improve our relations with China. You know, they're key. I don't know how to do that right now in this seminar, but you know, we've got the trade war. We're blaming China over the virus. The Chinese are geopolitically acting against our interests. They're aggressive, but I think our diplomats are perfectly capable of having multifaceted dialogues with the Chinese in which there may be some areas of disagreement, some areas of convergence. Now, we know China is critical when it comes to the sanctions. If they don't enforce the sanctions, especially at the border, it's not going to work. So the Chinese don't want a nuclear capacity in their region there. So in their interest, they want bilateral talks or lessening of tensions with North Korea. So I'm going to conclude on the issue of what we should do and go into the soft power, because I think there are 5 steps we need to take on soft power that might precede some substantive negotiations. 1, find a way to deal with the COVID issue as a pillar of dialogue. I think there's a problem in North Korea with the COVID issue. They've closed the borders, the very strong lockdowns, but you know, with the Chinese border, I think there's a problem. And this is where I think Stephen Biegun has done a good job of being sort of the coordinator on the virus issue internationally. Maybe there's a way to open a dialogue there. Number 2, something that I was involved in the Bush administration, restart the repatriation of remains from North Korea, de-link the North Korean repatriation issue of our soldiers from a dialogue. There are over 5,300 remains of American servicemen still in North Korea. Their families, spouses, kids, grandkids dedicated their lives to try to bring them back home for burial. We know what it means to these families, what it means to our military, to our country to get them back. But beyond getting these, engaging and working with the North Koreans to recover these remains, it establishes a positive channel of goodwill, a channel that can stabilize the relationship. I brought back 7 remains during the Bush administration. I think this was a mutually good issue, but I think we have to de-link these issues. And the North Koreans, it's in their interest because military to military relationship, they also get foreign exchange, which is important to them. So I think this should happen as much as we can. Number 3, relax the restrictions on humanitarian aid. I think Jessica knows this. We now have to apply anybody that goes to North Korea. I would say there should be like a waiver on humanitarian relief, very specific, maybe COVID relief, where there's generosity in allowing some of these humanitarian trips to happen more than they have. I think there's also needs to be the promotion of an assessment of the North Korean economy. In other words, the World Bank might do a study of infrastructure, energy, what is needed there. Somebody's going to have to take the lead on this issue. I think obviously the economy there is in trouble, but I would think that this is something that is needed. Lastly, soft power. Pope Francis. The South Koreans had a very good idea. They invited Pope Francis to come to the border. I think that should be followed up. I think that's a goodwill measure. Other measures that I would do with South Korea. South Korea is a valuable ally. Let's stop talking, with South Korea and Japan about troop reductions. You know, these troops are in our interest, in our geopolitical interest. We should stop treating troop reductions as a way to save money with Japan and with South Korea. South Korea has really braved the dialogue with North Korea. President Moon, you know, he suffered politically. Let's find a way to work with him more than we have. The same with Japan. Japan has been neglected almost in these talks that we had with North Korea. You know, bring them in. The missiles affect them directly. They're a very loyal ally. That's why I mentioned the six-party talks. All right, so what do we do? Harry, I think you're right. I think the policy of maximum pressure, summit diplomacy, it hasn't worked. So what do? I think as a long-term goal, we say we want complete denuclearization, but at the same time, I think we also need to be realistic about what the North Koreans are willing to put on the table and see if that is satisfactory to us. They're not going to want to denuclearize. I think what we do is find a way to set up a framework. I would call it a framework of nuclear reciprocity, where over a period of time, they find ways to cease all further development of nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, disclosing, dismantling their development sites, stop all relevant tests, possibly destroy some testing facilities, get them to stop proliferation, verification of international inspections, find ways to recognize that you can't get them to eliminate all of their nuclear, they're not going to do it, or their missile activities. Find ways that they resolve we need to resolve who goes first. We always get hogged up in that. We need a step-by-step strategy. We can't always be in lockstep. You know, one of the things that I've learned about North Korea, how am I doing, Harry? Am I 2 minutes away or what? One? I'm okay? All right, so what I would do is you find in negotiating with the North Koreans, they never say no. What they don't do is they don't respond, and that basically means a no. Number two, despite the bluster and their unpredictability, they don't negotiate like we do, like quid pro quos. I mean, they're totally in the belief that everything they're doing is right and sanctified by their great leaders. So it's not easy. And I always find, finally, don't underestimate them. They know the politics in the United States, in their own country. I think their objective is not to denuclearize completely, keep some of those weapons, but also I think their economy, they know their economy's in trouble. They need help. They want sanctions relief. So I think there's a trade there that needs to be established with our military, with the State Department, instead of all making it part of a White House political initiative. And I said, I gave the president credit because all these years we've had all these negotiations with North Korea at lower levels, and they necessarily haven't all worked. I think the agreed framework under Clinton was good. I think a partial framework under Bush was good. But in the end, it's the presidents, the leaders that decide, but there wasn't enough preparation to do this. Anyway, not bad, 16 minutes, Harry.
That's great. That was great.
And unfortunately, I have to go, and I apologize to the General and Jessica and Matthew and Daryl and Lillian and all your great listeners, but I got to run off. But many thanks for having, and I commend the center. You guys are doing great work. Keep doing this. Harry, you guys are a positive, bipartisan, moderate influence. And I will say moderate because as a member of my party, as a moderate, I've become an endangered species. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Governor. We appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that and those great remarks, we will get started with our panel. What we're going to do is very simple, is every panelist is going to get about, let's say 14 minutes to sort of discuss where they think each presidency would go when it comes to North Korea. Where Joe Biden would go, where Donald Trump would go. Will we have more tensions? Will we have more summits? It's going to be interesting to see what they say. So our first panelist, we're going to go in alphabetical order, is Lieutenant General Wallace Gregson, a good friend of mine who I haven't seen in a long time. I hope you're doing well, sir. He's our Senior Director of China and the Pacific Program at the Center. A lot of great experience, can talk from experience. Former Marine, Lieutenant General of the Marines, led the Marines in the Asia Pacific region, served honorably in the Obama administration. So I think he has a lot to tell us and to give us some insights on this issue. So General, please, the floor is yours.
Harry, good to see you again. Thank you. And one of my other punishments for my misspent youth is I got to visit Pyongyang 3 times in the late 90s as part of different negotiations. So many of the people that Governor Richardson mentioned are still in the same type of business in North Korea that they were in 1998 and 1999 when I first met them. And it's you shouldn't, nobody on the in this audience ought to dash off to Pyongyang. It's an entertainment challenge place, and the cable TV is non-existent except for propaganda films. So something Ambassador Detrani knows well, and I see he's one of our attendees. There's many reasons to pursue nuclear disarmament with North Korea, especially if it's done in company with allies and international partners. I was really glad to hear Governor Richardson mention bringing in as many of our friends and allies as we can, but actually achieving disarmament, nuclear disarmament, is not one of them. We have a pattern, one of the many patterns we've set with North Korea over the years is we set a goal that's frankly, in my mind, impossible, complete nuclear disarmament of North Korea, and then we shut off all contact after we're disappointed by North Korea, and we go back and reset, and an administration or 2 later, we go through the same cycle again. But pursuing disarmament initiatives has political value as demonstrated in the past, and Ambassador Richardson hit on some of these. It offers us convening power to bring both friends and opponents to the table. In the past, we pulled both North Korea and China into discussions with South Korea, Japan, Russia, and the US. We introduced South Korean laborers into North Korea at the Kaesong Industrial Complex when that was a viable initiative. We pulled North Korean officials out of North Korea for negotiations. We sent scientists and experts to North Korea along with US officials. We even created an international organization with funding to bring light water reactors to North Korea. We succeeded in getting Americans released from North Korean custody. Ambassador Detrani will well remember the 2 journalists that crossed the Yalu, got picked up, and then we had to send former President Clinton over there to negotiate their release at the beginning of the Obama administration. Being able to do that is no small thing, but you have to have contact and you have to have international support. Talking reassured our friends and allies that we would not act precipitously, and to a point I think also that I heard Governor Richardson make is pursuing disarmament may allow us to start reassuming our leadership role among international organizations. We've forfeited that role badly in the last 3.5 years. While disarmament efforts have some value, we have abundant empirical evidence that we will not achieve nuclear disarmament in the current structure. The obstacles are many. What importance will North Korea have without its weapons of mass destruction? We'd probably give it the same attention we give Bhutan. What personal security would Kim Jong-un have if he gave up the nuclear program started by his sainted grandfather? And it's the same program upon which many valued members of his inner circle have built their fame and created their own lifestyle. That goes away, their lifestyle goes away. What kind of security guarantee can we and our international partners offer the Kim family that would be credible, that would be trusted? North Korea is hardly an ally, making a security guarantee quite an odd fit. What would we be prepared to do to guarantee North Korea's security? And against whom? We have a habit lately of backing out of agreements with friends and questioning alliances. Why would Kim think we would not back away from a security guarantee with him? After all, he was in school in Switzerland when Gaddafi was killed, and likely really internalized that experience when Gaddafi was assassinated. After Kim genuinely gives up his nuclear program, would our own politics allow us to maintain a security guarantee in the face of Kim's odious human rights abuses? What would we do about a North Korea, Japan, or a North Korea, Republic of Korea confrontation? Whose side would we pick? Would we turn a blind eye to North Korea's black market arms sales, not just in nuclear material, but in every other kind of weapons? China and Russia, both nuclear armed nations, share borders with North Korea. Would we offer extended deterrence to North Korea? China and Russia are not their friends. The weapons business is exceptionally good for North Korea. Our own staff member at the National Interest, Mark Episcopos, has an excellent, concise article on our website on this topic. Nuclear and missile material and technology sit at the top of their arms business, but it's not their only business. From the 1980s, North Korea exported everything from tanks to missiles and artillery to the world's most odious regimes by land and sea. Their global criminal network, operating often in plain sight, enjoys great success. Profit from the weapons trade keeps Kim's core supporters, estimated to be about 1 million, in a comfortable lifestyle and therefore supportive. As I mentioned just earlier, I question whether they would still support the Kim family if their lifestyle went away. Nuclear weapons are not the only North Korean weapon of mass destruction. If we're going to talk about disarmament, we got to roll them all in there. On 13 February 2017, Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of Kim Jong-un, was attacked with VX nerve agent in a departure area of the Kuala Lumpur airport in Malaysia. 10 milliliters of VX, one drop on the skin, is a deadly dose. It's odorless, persistent, and fatal. Note that this attack demonstrated both skill and will in the deployment and employment of a weapon of mass destruction, in this case, an extremely dangerous nerve agent. It also served notice to Malaysia and other nations that North Korea could reach out and retaliate should their expatriate countrymen be arrested or sent home. Sanctions, while they've had some effect, have not created enough pressure to make a real difference. North Korea's global network, opportunistic fellow travelers in the illicit weapons business are simply too strong. To cite just one example, in December 2017, 10 months after the VX attack, the UN directed the return home of all North Koreans working overseas within 12 months. But as we know, UN sanctions require the support of member states. We're now past that 12-month deadline with no discernible movement home. What we can do is focus on the real issue, the safety and security of the United States and our allies and friends. This will require strengthening our conventional deterrence and our missile defense capability and capacity. By all means, negotiate, but carry a big stick and an effective shield. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, General Gregson, for that. Always great remarks. Next, I'm going to go again, going in alphabetical order. I'm going to bring in a good friend of the center and Jessica Lee. Jessica does great work at the Quincy Institute, which is I guess you could say a somewhat new think tank here in Washington, but very well known, very respected, does great work on realism and restraint in foreign policy. You can see Jessica's work in the national interest, foreign policy. She's very prolific there and really all over the place. She's got a great background and great expertise in North Korea. She does a lot of public speaking and is on television quite a bit. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Jessica for the next 14 minutes, and she's going to tell us exactly what either Donald Trump or Joe Biden will do when it comes to North Korea. Thanks, Jessica.
Harry, thank you for that generous introduction. You probably know that you are among the most well-respected Korea analysts in Washington and in Korea. So it's great to be in this webinar with you, and really honored to be part of this discussion today. As somebody who's worked on the North Korea issue, as you pointed out, in Washington, whether it's on Capitol Hill or as a community organizer, I've come to, realize that, the question you posed today, which is, who is going to be leading the next chapter of American diplomacy in national security, come January 2021, to be an incredibly important and challenging question to answer. But I'm really glad that we're talking about that today, because as we all probably can agree, North Korea is arguably among the most challenging and difficult foreign policy issue that's facing us, here in Washington. So just as a quick background, in 2017, North Korea successfully developed a intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, that could reach continental United States. And on January 1st, 2018, Kim Jong-un declared that North Korea's nuclear deterrent was complete. Yet somehow that wasn't enough for him, because 5 months after he declared that, he obviously met with President Trump in Singapore. So that historic meeting, as we all know, resulted in a joint statement that was signed by President Trump and Kim Jong-un that really pledged to transform and take, to a new era, an unprecedented, era of cooperation, peaceful coexistence, and what they called a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. And so I remember being, in this Korean American National Civic Organization at the time, in the 2017-2018 period, and really feeling that sense of euphoria, as a Korean American myself, and feeling really optimistic that, the era of, that my parents, remember and grew up in, which is the Korean War-torn era, and the division of the peninsula, could actually, be something that looks very differently in maybe my daughter's lifetime, maybe even my lifetime. So I was very optimistic. But, since President Trump's term began, back in 2016, just to take a very macro perspective in all this, the world really has changed. Today, there's increasing tensions between the United States and China. The COVID pandemic has profoundly changed, our country as well as the world. And North Korea has become a de facto nuclear power. At the same time, Americans are tired of foreign wars, inflated threats, and militarism that moves federal dollars away from domestic priorities here at home. According to a YouGov poll from July, 75% of Americans think the US government should focus on domestic priorities, not foreign policy priorities. So whoever prevails in January, the American president will need policies that improve lives here at home rather than needlessly escalate tension in places Americans don't want to be in. Unfortunately, many in Washington continue to underestimate the North Korea issue, which Governor Richardson just covered and warned us against. Most analysts would describe North Korea as a backward country whose leadership can't be trusted, pointing to failed agreements under Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations as proof that, talking with them rationally is just, a waste of time. Yet North Korea has shown time and again that it can not only survive, but thrive under international condemnation. So, just to give everyone a sense, the Department of Army estimates today that North Korea possesses between 20 and 60 bombs and between 2,500 and 5,000 tons of chemical weapons, which makes them the third largest possessor of chemical agents globally. So what would a second Trump administration policy toward North Korea look like? Donald Trump ran for presidency promising to get wealthy countries to pay more toward American defense, and he vowed to end endless wars and bring troops home, right? The premise of President Trump's criticism about the use of US military, I think, is totally valid. For too long, the US has maintained forward deployment presence in countries that are well positioned to fend for themselves. And so viewed through that lens, the Trump administration's push to transform US-North Korea relations are extremely commendable and entirely appropriate. Clearly, President Trump has some advantages that Joe Biden simply does not have in addressing the North Korea issue. Principally, he and Kim Jong-un have met several times, 3 times, and apparently, like each other quite a bit. I'm sure we're going to get into the Bob Woodward book, but they seem to trust each other. Although, as we all have said, I think it's questionable what that trust and that chemistry has resulted in. As you started off with, Harry. So for example, according to Bob Woodward's new book, Kim Jong-un in one of his letters to Trump wrote that he believed there was a deep and special friendship between them that will work as a magical force. And that, apparently President Trump also said that Kim Jong-un tells him everything, quote unquote, everything, including how he had killed, had his own uncle killed. But as we saw in Hanoi, this personal chemistry, while it's really important in international diplomacy, as the governor said, isn't sufficient to bridge the gulf between aspiration and reality. President Trump may have overestimated his ability to coax Kim into reaching a bigger deal, while Kim Jong-un appears to have underestimated the power of Trump's deputies to dissuade him from any deal that could lock him into a set of binding commitments or political fights that would be required for the deal to really stick. If he is elected to a second term, President Trump should appoint a seasoned diplomat like a Steve Biegun to negotiate a deal with North Korea at a working level, as I think the governor and Harry and the general pointed out, and to really maintain a low profile until a deal is actually reached. This person should be someone who is nonpartisan, who has a deep understanding of North Korea, a skilled negotiator, and someone who understands that this is as much a political issue as it is a policy issue. In other words, this has to be someone who can work with Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, as well as in international bodies like the UN, to make the case for an agreement that will require waiving certain US and UN sanctions, among other things that could incentivize North Korea toward disarmament and eventual denuclearization. This all may prove to be very difficult for President Trump, given his propensity for tweeting and personalizing politics, but his direct connection to Kim Jong-un will be very valuable once there is a negotiated deal to be embraced. In the meantime, quiet diplomacy, not fanfare or brinksmanship, should guide the second term. Secondly, President Trump is clearly not someone who is concerned about breaking taboos of international diplomacy. Prior to his meeting with Kim, the highest meeting between officials of our 2 countries was in October 2000, when then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright visited North Korea, where she had a 6-hour meeting with Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, to persuade him to suspend missile tests. Trump's unconventional style is precisely what is needed to break the logjam of US-North Korea diplomacy. There's so much bad blood and mistrust that is holding back both sides. And so why bother expecting the results to be different when you're looking at the same playbook? Trump should be bold in putting everything on the table, as negotiators tend to do, and calibrating a compromise where neither side gets everything they want, but most of what they need to go home. Serious challenges abide, whether it is a Trump second term or a new Democratic president. Kim Jong-un, of course, may choose to do something provocative before the next president is sworn in, forcing some sort of a punitive response from Washington. And North Korea may also reject offers for working level talks, which would be incredibly frustrating and short-sighted. And that would, I think, really undermine, everything I've said about the importance of diplomacy and engagement. If they're not going to receive it, then, it just undercuts the argument and really the oxygen out of folks who advocate for that strategy here in Washington. So that they should really avoid that. But there is a unique, challenge facing the a potential second Trump term that is unlikely to be as acute for a Biden administration, and that, of course, is the president's, view of diplomacy as a very individualized, touch and go. I'll see him, I'll make eye contact, and make a decision on the spot kind of effort, as opposed to what we're talking about, which is more working level, steady, quiet diplomacy between, negotiators. Turning back to Bob Woodward's book, President Trump reportedly refuted critics of his summits by downplaying their harm. He said, look, quote, it takes me 2 days, I gave up nothing. And such a statement, in my view, doesn't bode well for future negotiations. It's true that President Trump lost nothing by meeting with Kim Jong-un, but by making virtually no progress, President Trump has aggravated the already low level of trust that exists between the two countries and diluted the atmosphere that is conducive to serious diplomacy. This, in turn, again, can be used by proponents of maximum pressure to say that diplomacy has been tried and failed, and that the only thing North Korea understands is more pressure until it capitulates. So now let me turn to Joe Biden. If Joe Biden were to become president, the United States would of course face a different set of challenges and opportunities. Although there are some parallels as well. Biden appears to support negotiations with North Korea, at least nominally, which is a great thing. I referred to the Council for a Livable World survey, which had asked presidential candidates, do you support continued diplomacy with North Korea with the goal of negotiating the eventual denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? And Biden said yes. Biden is also committed to what he calls, quote, arms control for a new era, including North Korea, mirroring the Iran deal, perhaps. Yet these pledges are, of course, meaningless, as we all know, in Washington, without personnel that could translate them into policies. So it's possible, and it's possible that some of the architects of the strategic patience era and strategy during the Obama administration will hold similar positions and roles in a Biden administration. There are Asia experts who negotiated the failed LEAP deal and have become very skeptical and burnt from that process, and who have no desire to try to negotiate another agreement. So there should be, in my view, some kind of a balance between those who support more kind of conservative, risk-averse, policies and tendencies toward North Korea, and those who are more, assertive and aggressive and transformative in their thinking, more progress-oriented. So that would entail, appointing experts, from diverse backgrounds, not just the, Defense Department or CIA. To create a team that can stand up to the complex challenges that are embedded in this relationship. So people with background in conflict resolution and peace building might, offer some insights that, most of our bureaucrats may not have, as an example. So I'm nearing the end of my remarks here. If Vice President Biden can put together a credible team that doesn't dismiss outright some of the good that came out of the Trump administration and work with Republicans in Congress, I believe it's possible that Biden can build a bipartisan coalition that could support this more forward-looking agenda on North Korea. It could be, it could entail a combination of suspending, major military exercises with South Korea in exchange for a moratorium on long-range missile tests, coupled with some sort of a declaration of the end of war, lifting of the visa ban for Americans to travel to North Korea over time, easing of certain sanctions, as I mentioned before, particularly for humanitarian activities, and in particular related to COVID. Finally, regardless of who the U.S. president is, I think Congress has to be a willing partner in all of this. And we all know that in the past, Congress has sometimes played been an obstruction to progress with North Korea. I wrote a chapter about the North Korean nuclear challenge for the Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, WCAP's upcoming report that I'll be happy to share with you when it comes out in a few days. And in that chapter, I talk about, I show the number of times National Security Committees on the Hill held hearings related to North Korea since 2017, and who testified in those hearings. And the Defense Department, intelligence community, and think tanks that are funded in large part by defense companies are overrepresented in these hearings on North Korea. And I think that's a problem, because those with links to defense contractors may have financial incentives to promote policies that create more dependency on US defense and arms sales, rather than advocate for policies that lead to peace and stability around the world. So we can't have that kind of overrepresentation and influence when it comes to the North Korea issue. I think Democrats also must be really careful not to treat this issue as a partisan matter, which maybe we can get to when I have more time during Q&A. So finally, this whole kind of discussion, and in writing about this, I've been thinking a lot about this proverb in Korean, 시작이 반이다, which means getting started is really often the hardest step in anything. But once you go down a path, it helps you move forward. There's momentum. So on US North Korea diplomacy, it's the same. We started this thing, We should take the best of what the Trump administration has done and use that as momentum for further progress. So I hope that whoever prevails in January can do that. Thank you.
Good stuff, Jessica. Thank you so much. You know, it's interesting. One of the things about the Biden administration possible choices when it comes to North Korea is, at least from my own perspective, I've read so many different things that it doesn't seem clear that they've thought through their policy choices, or maybe they haven't firmed up who would be, at least theoretically, in one position. You know, you see a lot of hawkish voices. Then you see somebody like Susan Rice, who it seems has had a mea culpa on North Korea, saying that we can live with a nuclear North Korea. So it'd be kind of interesting to see if she gets a senior position and, you know, how she could influence North Korea policy. Then you have progressives who have, you know, very, very different views, like a Tulsi Gabbard or something like that. So if Joe Biden does come into office, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. So we'll have to watch that very carefully. Last but certainly not least is Daryl Press. I feel like I know Daryl a little bit, and you might think that's a little strange, but I've been reading his work for a very long time now. So it's a great honor to have him on the panel today. As many of you know, he's an associate professor at Dartmouth. He's very prolific in the academic community. Just wrote a great piece in the National Interest with Jennifer Lin in our symposium on North Korea and how a Biden administration would tackle North Korea. So I encourage everybody to check that out. We have over 50 different perspectives there. So with that, Daryl is going to do a little future gazing for us and give us his sense of how either Trump or Biden would handle the DPRK. Daryl.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this terrific panel. I've already learned a lot from my colleagues on the panel. I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to step away from the dramatic news that we're getting in the headlines and the daily back and forth on the policy details about North Korea. And I'm going to try to shed a little bit of light, as I see it, on alternatives for U.S. policy for a Trump or Biden administration going forward by looking at three major changes on the Korean Peninsula and maritime East Asia, which I believe are going to set the context for either of those administrations going forward. And let me say that when I look back over my notes, I worried that I'm being a little provocative here. I'll say I'm going to be a little direct, but I'm going to do it not as some sort of an exaggeration or not some sort of a Swiftian thought experiment. I mean what I'm about to say here, and I'm going to be direct and provocative simply because I think that in reality, there have been dramatic changes on the peninsula and in the region in the past few years, which I'm going to talk about. And what's happened to U.S. foreign policy is what happens to us as individuals when things change gradually, which is we keep accommodating the new realities without going back to first principles and asking ourselves, do we have the right approach or the wrong approach? So I want to focus on what I see has changed on the Korean Peninsula, and then just make the argument that these have fundamental implications for the U.S.-South Korean alliance in terms of the purpose of the alliance, the objective of the partners, and what each side can gain from this alliance going forward and what each side risks through this alliance going forward. So let me jump right in. The first major change is a dramatic change in the military balance of power on the Korean Peninsula. I think most people who've watched the Korean Peninsula fairly closely, even if you're not focused on the military details, probably have a sense that the North Korean military is eroding. In fact, there is lots of evidence to suggest that the erosion has gone much further than has seeped into the US foreign policy community broadly. And that the North Korean military, if they have not already passed it, is at the point of irreversible decline, with implications for the nature of the alliance and the objectives we seek. All right, here's where I started worrying about my unnecessary provocativeness here. The first line on the next page, which now I'm backing away from, is to say, I think there's a good argument to make that today, North Korea doesn't any longer have a real military. Their military is essentially gone. They have something, and they have something that's dangerous. They have a large number of men under arms. Many of them are close to the DMZ. But in essential respects, it doesn't have the core attributes of what we think about as a modern military. What do I mean by this? Well, the main components of military power include, sure, weapons, of course, but also personnel and maintenance and supply and training and exercise and leadership, command. And when you go through those criteria, the level of decay over the past 15 years in North Korea on each of those dimensions is truly stunning. In terms of weapons, I think it's pretty broadly known, but their major weapon systems are extremely old. Yes, they bought a few things here and there, but I compared their major weapon systems to the holdings of Iraq in 1990. And I'll tell you, I don't think the North Korean army has a chance against the Republican Guard divisions of 1990. Their weapons are exceedingly old. In terms of maintenance, here I'm talking about the routine maintenance. It's the mundane stuff, the regular replacement of seals and filters, oil and lubrication, routine repairs. This is ground to a halt in North Korea some number of years ago. In terms of training, some training happens in North Korea. It's almost all at the company level and below. And imagining not just a regiment level, a multiple division, a multiple corps level operation by an army which doesn't train seriously above the company level, it's very difficult to imagine. In terms of exercises, people who are professional as soldiers, as opposed to analysts, frequently say, if you don't exercise it, the capability doesn't exist. Whatever plans you have on paper are just plans on paper until you put your troops through the exercises over and over again. North Korea still does some exercises, but at very low levels and increasingly infrequently. In terms of command and morale, it's very difficult to know the morale of the North Korean military, but I think everybody who follows North Korea knows there are lots of stories about very low morale, about abuse and mistreatment of soldiers within the North Korean military. In terms of personnel, it's disputed, but there are signs that perhaps there's big health problems throughout the North Korean military. The point is this, is if North Korea is actually able to field this military and to conduct basic military operations with anything resembling normal levels of military effectiveness, we should rip up our understanding of what creates military power. Because they're not doing any of the essential things that which we believe, and the British believe, and the Russians believe, and the Germans believe, and the Israelis believe, turn a group of young men with some weapons actually into units that can conduct meaningful military operations. Now, let me be clear. This does not mean that North Korea poses no threat. I don't believe that at all. They do. What it means is they and their military, such as it is, poses a different kind of danger. It's a danger that stems from weakness, from vulnerability, not just perceived vulnerability, but actual vulnerability, a danger stemming from risk of collapse, and it may require reshaping the way we think about the alliance and what we want it to contribute to South Korea's and America's security. So that's change number one, is movement from a world in which North Korea had a somewhat backwards but nevertheless potent conventional military force to a world in which they don't do any of the things that we believe generate actual military power. Okay, change number one. Change number two. All right, the North Korean military appears to me to be in deep terminal decline. However, war is still possible on the Korean Peninsula. If you look through history, wars start for all kinds of reasons. Some of them are accidents, some of them are misperceptions. It's possible that you could get a partial collapse in North Korea, civil war or some level of fighting in Pyongyang that essentially forces South Korea to go north. War on the Korean Peninsula could come from many sources. But what I would say is change number two is the potential consequences of war on the Korean Peninsula have grown much, much worse for the United States than it's ever been before, even though the North Korean army has gotten weaker. Why is this? Well, during the Cold War and the immediate post-Cold War period, if God forbid there was a war on the Korean Peninsula, the United States military would have fought shoulder to shoulder with the South Korean army. We might have lost several thousand troops. We might have lost several tens of thousands of troops, depending on how the war would have gone. Maybe we and our allies would have stopped the North Korean army north of Seoul, maybe not. But at the end of the war, I think the odds were very, very good that the United States and South Korea would have won. What's changed? Change number one happened in 2006 when North Korea tested its first atomic weapon. Change number two, the exact date is debatable, but let's just say Some period of time later, North Korea developed the ability to deliver primitive nuclear weapons in its region. And then change number 3 is one that's still emerging. We're not quite there yet, but we're knocking at the door, which is the ability of North Korea to reliably deliver, in peace or in war, atomic or thermonuclear weapons against American cities. We're knocking right up against that change number 3. What North Korea's nuclear capabilities mean to me, in my opinion, is that if there is a conventional war on the Korean Peninsula tomorrow, through any of the mechanisms I described or one that I can't anticipate, the first few hours and days of that war are pretty clear in my mind. Namely, the United States and South Korea would make extensive efforts to use conventional forces against a variety of targets to try to prevent North Korea from using its nuclear weapons. This would very likely involve conventional attacks against suspected storage sites, suspected delivery systems, North Korean communication systems, command and control, possibly leadership sites, etc. The question is, will this work? Will it be entirely successful and prevent North Korea from using its regime survival weapons? Will it be partially successful? We don't know. But what I will say is if there is a war on the Korean Peninsula, in one sense, it will be a nuclear war, in the sense that we and our allies will put their nuclear forces in the crosshair of our conventional weapons as quickly as possible. All right? Now, the United States has a long history of facing dangers like this. This is not a new danger. The United States spent most of the Cold War anteing up its cities in order to take risks to protect its allies and deter attacks on them on the Korean Peninsula and most prominently in Europe. We did that to prevent the Soviets from conquering Europe during the Cold War, but we weren't doing that in Korea in 1950 or even in 1985. In 1985, what we were risking on the Korean Peninsula, and today or until 2006, what we were risking was a bloody, nasty conventional war. We now are taking that risk with respect to the Korean Peninsula. And what does that mean? It means that this will create new tensions and points of disagreement between the United States and South Korea about everything from red lines and war plannings and concepts of operations. And it means that it ought to trigger difficult decisions and discussions among the American foreign policy elite about how we balance our interests in forward-leaning on the Korean Peninsula to deter a war versus taking steps that needlessly risk escalation if such a war happens. I'd be happy to talk about that more in questions afterwards. So change number 1 is dramatic change on the conventional balance on the Korean Peninsula. Change number 2 is that the risks and stakes on the Korean Peninsula have gone up dramatically for the United States as North Korea acquired and expanded and now is expanding the reach of its nuclear arsenal. Change number 3 is the shift in US priorities in East Asia. Once again, you can see these changes if you walk through history. In the Cold War, our interests were that Korea was one of the fronts in the global struggle against the Soviet Union. In the post-Cold War world, Korea was one of many countries who was part of this effort to expand a global order of democracy, markets, and rights. And Korea served as a useful beacon of the potential for change, the move from authoritarianism to democracy, the development of markets around the world, and also as a lily pad for US military forces, not only in East Asia, but elsewhere in the region. Today, America's primary interest in East Asia has focused more narrowly. The primary interest has to do with managing the rise of China. And by managing the rise of China, I don't mean necessarily containing China. I mean trying to set the stage in East Asia and shape incentives to increase the odds that China will join this international order and follow the rules that we very much hope they will follow, and not try to overthrow either the regional or the global order. All right. The problem we face as it affects the US-Korea alliance is that for reasons that frankly I can understand and I'm empathetic toward, South Korea is not sure they want to be part of this effort. And they've told the United States government this in many different ways. Let's be fair. South Korea, or I should say Korea, has a land border with China. Korea has the Korean government, a series of Korean governments, have expressed different views about the level of hostility in China's foreign policy that many in the United States feel. And to say it the most direct way, and maybe the most important way, China is in the region permanently. We are in the region now. And policymakers and analysts in Korea are acutely aware of that. So I understand the South Korean ambivalence to choosing sides. What is the line that we hear over and over again from partners in South Korea and even partners in Japan, which is, please don't make us choose. All right. The problem is this is going to create increasing discomfort in the US-South Korean alliance. The argument that says, we'd love your protection. In fact, we love the fact, or we like the fact that you're willing to ante up your cities to defend us from our gravest threat. But we don't really want to help you with what you perceive as the major national security problem in East Asia, is an argument which I understand coming from South Koreans, but it's going to cause tension in the US-South Korean alliance. Imagine if during the Cold War, Great Britain said, we'd love to have a bilateral alliance with the United States. We'd love to have your protection in defending us and keeping anyone from crossing the English Channel, but we're not willing to help out at all with regard to defending against the Soviet Union. That would be an argument which would be difficult to sustain and would have led to big problems in the US-UK relationship. That's the problem I think we're facing going forward. So in sum, the changes as I see them are dramatic changes in the conventional balance, and happily, a greatly reduced conventional threat to South Korea, but the emergence of other types of threats as a result. Number two, the greatly increasing risk to the United States homeland if there is a war on the Korean Peninsula. And number three, increasing questions about the way that South Korea is relevant to the primary US national security objectives in their region. The case can be made that they are, but it's a more difficult case to be made today than it was in the recent past. Now, in conclusion, let me just simply say, some people hear these facts. I think they're facts. Some people hear these arguments and they say, well, clearly what you're saying is that we should end the alliance with South Korea. They're not vulnerable, the costs to us have increased, and they're not on board for the counter-China management operation. In reality, that's not my view. I don't think that this means that we should be ending the alliance with South Korea. And the reason is this, is I think there's an argument to be made that we should give time for this to play out further. That in the past few years, China's foreign policy has been so headstrong and so regionally tone deaf in a variety of different ways that China has gone a long way toward convincing many countries in East Asia and around the world who previously welcomed China's rise into believing that China must be managed, that there is a big problem here. If that continues, if China continues, whether it's through brutalization of the people in Hong Kong or brutalization of Taiwan or something else, China might bumble their way into pushing South Korea and the United States closer together. And so I think there's a good argument to let this play out and to not make any rash breaks in an alliance which is roughly 70 years old. But I would say that while the easiest path is always to continue with existing relationships, keep old friends close, that when things are changing as dramatically as they are in East Asia, when interests are not becoming opposed, but they're diverging, and especially when the direct risks of this relationship to the US homeland are going up so dramatically, it does mean that we should be asking real questions of ourselves and real questions of our allies about the extent to which the alliance is really solving our and their problems going forward. And if not, how can the alliance be adjusted to bring the interests of the United States and one of its closer allies closer together? So let me end there.
All right, well, thank you, Daryl. I don't think controversial by any means. I think you asked some really, really good questions, and I think they're all very valid. And to be honest with you, I don't think the challenges that the North Korean conventional military has really just don't get the play. I think always, you know, the media goes for the sexy headline, the nuclear weapons, the ICBMs, the, the advanced missile systems that get, played and replayed on social media. So I thought that was wonderful. We are slowly running out of time. So I've got a number of questions. And the funny thing is the vast majority of them, I'll say 75% of them, all sort of circle around the same idea. So I'm going to just cut to the chase very quickly and ask each panelist to give me maybe 2 minutes on, what they think about this topic, and we'll basically end there. One of the things I get a lot of questions about in some of my travels before COVID, and from others, and even I had a White House official ask this to me a few days ago, and I'm going to paraphrase sort of everybody's questions and that particular person's question as well. Can we live with a nuclear North Korea? Is that possible? Can we? I mean, we live with a nuclear Russia, nuclear China, nuclear India, nuclear Israel, nuclear Pakistan. That's pretty scary. Is it time to recalibrate our policy to make room for this horrific reality? Is this something we can live with? And can we create policies of nuclear deterrence that can mitigate the threat? So I really would like to have everybody's take, and unfortunately we do have to end it there. But this is sort of the question that a lot of people are asking in sort of variations, and I think it's important. So let's just go in alphabetical order and see what people say. So General Gregson, please.
The simple answer is yes. We've had, 30 years now trying to denuclearize North Korea, and that hasn't succeeded, and life goes on. But that doesn't mean it's the end of the efforts to create a better environment. Number one, ensure that we've got conventional deterrence, ensure that we've got the ability to protect our allies and friends. And then second, work hard on the other aspects like Ambassador Richardson talked about, the soft power things. North Korean citizens, the average North Korean citizen is much more aware of what's going on in the world now, that a lot of electronics have seeped into North Korea along with the smugglers. There's even a market economy going on that supports a autocratic government. They know what's going on. Long term, we can change North Korea, but we can't change North Korea by trying to negotiate away the only thing that gives them security and the only thing that gives them any importance.
That's great, General Gregson. Jessica, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes as well. I mean, I think the general is exactly right. And I would just say that, back in November 2017, Congressman Ted Lieu and Congressman Gallo sent a letter to, Defense Secretary Mattis about U.S. strategy toward North Korea and, how we would curb their nuclear weapons program. Like, could we figure out where they are, right? And like, how would we extract them? Like, what would we do exactly? And Secretary of Defense Mattis' response was the only way to locate all of those nuclear weapons and secure them with complete and utter certainty would be through an invasion of ground forces. And so, is that the level of risk that the United States is willing to take in order to completely and verifiably denuclearize North Korea by force? I would say overwhelming majority of Americans would think that is ludicrous, especially given the mounting challenges we face here at home with over $20 trillion of national debt. That is the last thing Americans want. And so it seems to me that the rational next step should be then, if we're not going to aspire for the perfect, let's scale down our ambitions, but really have that, goal perhaps as a long-term, idea that I think the governor and others have already talked about. But, what are the intermediary steps to reduce, as, Professor Press said, some kind of an accidental or actual, war between two nuclear armed states. And so I think that's exactly where we need to be asking these questions. And I think it's critical that we do that soon.
I think that's very, very prudent. Daryl, I'm going to give you the last word. Take it home.
Excellent. So I'll say this. So I'll say number one is I very much believe in deterrence. Deterrence practiced by powerful, sober, capable countries, and in that I do include the United States, can be very, very effective. So yes, we can live with this. But I do want to point out, this is, in my opinion, by far the most dangerous nuclear arsenal for the United States. And the reason is, I don't see any plausible world in which the United States or its close allies will be conducting major land operations in China. I don't see any plausible world in which the United States or its close allies will be conducting major land operations in Russia. But if North Korea starts another war on the Korean Peninsula, very quickly, South Korea and the United States will be doing that in North Korea. Or if North Korea suffers a partial collapse, it's very likely that South Korea is going to have to go north. So yes, I believe in deterrence. Yes, we can live with it. There are dangers in the world. But make no mistake, this arsenal is very dangerous for us because this is a war which we might have, and a war which might involve major land operations on the territory of another nuclear armed state. The last thing I'd say is our choice is not limited to two poles. The pole of denuclearize North Korea, which would be nice, but I agree it's not going to happen. It's not limited to denuclearize North Korea versus accept the fact that they're a full-fledged mature nuclear armed state. There are many important, meaningful positions in between, and we should grasp onto each of those each time, each next limit that we can get every time we lose one. So for example, reduction in tests is valuable. Every time North Korea tests a weapon, they learn things that make their weapons smaller, more effective, more reliable, and in some cases, much more lethal. Every time North Korea tests a missile, and especially an ICBM, they learn things which increase the missile delivery reliability of their systems. Any agreements we can get to slow, delay, or halt weapons tests, missile tests is very, very valuable to the United States. So I'd say look for space in the in-between. Talk the talk that we favor doing denuclearization, understand we're probably not going to get there, and offer what you have to do to slow their nuclear program. Because if there's a war on the Korean Peninsula, the more that program is limited, it might save millions, hundreds of thousands or millions of lives.
All right, well, thank you, Daryl. Well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Governor Richardson, I thank Jessica, General Gregson, Daryl for all joining us today. I think this is a great conversation. I think we furthered the discussion a little bit today when it comes to North Korea. And, you know, maybe we came up with new questions to ask, but I think they're very relevant questions. And I think when it comes to North Korea, one thing is clear. It is always a topic that is always moving, always changing, and always challenging us to really put our thinking caps on and think boldly when it comes to this issue, because it is not going away, irregardless of whether Donald Trump wins or Joe Biden wins. So with that, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for everybody for joining us, and stay tuned. We're going to be doing a lot more of these webinars on Zoom shortly. Thank you.